Okay, so we had some discussion about valve-in-valve cases, and this is something that can you hear me? Is it okay? Okay. Uh, so something we work on that, and we learn a lot. Uh, so if you look at the risk of needing to treat a patient who was what previously a surgical heart valve, you can see that it's not the same. You don't see it? Okay. 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 So if you look at the proportion of patients who need a valve-in-valve treatment, you can see that there is a big differences. So the most frequently used valve is Perimount. So the proportion is relatively high, but it's most frequently used valve in the world. And the first one is a MitraFlow. And we know that this valve is associated with a higher risk of degeneration and high risk for the procedure too. So we'll discuss about that. Now, if you look at the data, the paper was published 2 years ago. It's a multi-center evaluation, and you can see that whatever the problem of degeneration, you may have a very similar outcome. Maybe less when you have regurgitation than stenosis, but it's just a trend. So and you can see that at 1 year, you have relatively good outcome with a death rate around 10% or 8%, which is very acceptable in this patient who had previously surgical intervention. Now, if you look at the size of the valve, you can see that the outcome is also very similar. Now, in terms of result, you can see that the effective resist area is relatively stable after the procedure and at 1 year follow-up, and the same for the mean gradient, which I think is very good. But you can see that in terms of gradient, there is a difference if you use a valve less than 21 in diameter as compared to more than 21. So the outcome is very parallel, but the acute result is not exactly the same. So there is several tips and tricks for this kind of procedures. Very important to get the surgical report to understand what was used, which kind of valve, what's the size, and it's very useful to eliminate poor candidates for TAVI. It's very important also to know which kind of valve you have because the appearance on the screen, the characteristic of the valve may have a very important impact on the result. Of course, very important to eliminate poor candidates for valve-in-valve procedure like endocarditis. Even they have regurgitation. They are not good candidates. Patient who has thrombus and the MSCT before is very useful to identify the problem of thrombus. Patient with paravalvular leak due to the first valve implanted. Usually, it's better to go to resurgery than valve-in-valve. Then the second tip is to select the appropriate valve according to the MSCT and the characteristic of the valve. Of course, you know that if you use a supraannular valve, the risk of mismatch is lower as compared to a balloon expandable valve. But there is cases where it's better to use balloon expandable and cases where it's better to use self-expandable valve. Select the right size of the valve is also something very important, and it depends on the characteristics of the valve. You have a very nice ape from Dr. Bapat that you can use. They give you all the characteristics of each valve according to size and diameter, and they recommend the valve size and valve type also. So it's very important to know all these characteristics because the internal diameter of the valve is always smaller than the external, the out diameter, for example. Then evaluate the need to protect coronary arteries. I think it's very important because the risk of coronary occlusion is clearly higher when you treat this kind of problem. In the VIVA study, it was about 2%. In the VIVIT registry, it's about 2%. And of course, we know that in case of occlusion, the survival is very low. So it's very important to identify that in order to protect the coronary arteries. There is also cases where you may have a delayed obstruction of the coronary arteries, and it may occur up to 400 days after the procedure. So this is, I think, very important. And of course, the risk is a little bit higher when you use self-expanded valve as compared to balloon expanded valve. There is some prosthetic factors of occlusion, like coaxiality of the valve, especially if the valve is more orientated toward the left main, for example. So this is very important to have that in mind. And there is also anatomic factors like the distance to the cornea ostia, the distance of annulus to cornea ostia, the width of the sinus or valsalva. If they are narrowed, the risk is clearly higher. The diameter of the sinotubular junction, so if it's a short diameter, the risk is higher, and the virtual distance to the ostium. And of course, the difference between the THV that you will use and the valsalva size. And when it's shorter than 3 millimeters, the risk of occlusion is maybe very high. So it's really a careful analysis of MSCT to predict the risk of occlusion. So I will show you just some examples. So this is a case where you have a distance between the annulus and the left main, which is 9 millimeters. So some risk of occlusion. So in this case, we just protect the left main. We have selected a self-expanded valve, and we know that we'll have the narrow part in front of the left main, so relatively low risk of occlusion. You see the narrowest part is really in front of the left main. Now this is a more complex case with a shorter distance, which is 7 millimeters. So in this case, the risk of occlusion is very high. So in this case, it's better to protect with a wire in place and a stent that you can deliver if necessary. So this is after deployment of the valve. You can see that there is a compromise of the left main. The cranial view is also very useful to see if we need to treat the left main. And in this case, it was very tight. You can use also IVUS to identify if you have a compromise. And then in this case, we have used what we call a chimney technique, because when we use a self-expanded valve, the stent should be higher than the valve. So this is deployment of the stent, and this is final result. And you see the distance between the valve and the left main, which is very short. Accurate deployment is also something very important. So very important to deploy slowly and remove the tension, because if you have tension, you may have some movement of the valve, especially with a self-expanded one. proximal or distal. And usually we pace according to the stability of the valve at a rate of 100 and sometimes higher. So we may go up to 160. The placement of the valve is also something very important, and you can see that the higher is the better in terms of effective orifice valve area. This is the higher position with a trifecta, higher position with a mitral flow, higher position with EPIC. So I think it's very important to learn how to put the valve as high as possible, because you will have at the end a better effective orifice area. Very important also to have thoracic echo on board, because after deployment of the valve, you can check the gradient, and sometimes you may have a very high gradient, which can be improved just by doing post-dilatation. So it's a remodeling of the previous valve with a balloon, and I think it's very useful. And in some cases, you will have to crack the previous valve in order to obtain a good result. So this is a paper from Allen published 4 years ago, who showed that you can break the valve. Some valves are unbreakable, like the trifecta and the Hancock valve, but the other are breakable with relatively high pressure. You can see, for example, with Magna Ease, you should go to 18 atmosphere, and with a Magna to 24 atmosphere in order to be able to break the valve. So this is something very useful. You should use a non-compliant balloon with a diameter which is 1 millimeter more than the diameter of the previous valve. So this is an example of remodeling. So you see a non-compliant balloon that was used just to improve the gradient. And of course, there is other techniques to prevent the risk of occlusion of the valve, of the coronary arteries, which is cusp laceration. This is how it works in the bench. We have no experience of this technique in our center, but some centers are doing that in Europe. And it's mainly a technique which is used in the US. And if you look at the result, they are not so good, in my opinion. So my take-home messages is that it's very important to anticipate the risk. So get a detailed surgical report. Look carefully at the MSCT. So you should have a very good MSCT done before. Pay attention with the risk of mismatch. So self-expanding supraannular is a very good valve, but it should be in a high position. Very important to post-dilate if you have residual gradient of more than 15 millimeter, or even 12, in my opinion, today. Even if the valve is not breakable, you can remodel the valve and you may improve the gradient. And sometimes you have to break the valve in order to have a good result, especially if you have a very important mismatch when the surgery was done. So of course, it's better not to have a trifecta and Hancock on board, because they are not breakable. And it's preferable to do surgery for small annulus, whatever the risk. Coronary occlusion, I think it's a very important problem with this kind of valve. So we should have a low threshold for coronary protection. Occlusion is easy to manage if you have already a wire in place and the guiding in place. take care about stent crush if you need to post-dilate after THV, after the chimney. So we have some cases where we have done a kissing balloon inflation, post-dilatation of the THV and post-dilatation of the left main with a kissing. Long-term access to chimney is unknown today, but we have a 1-year follow-up which show relatively reassuring data. And of course, laceration of the valve is an option, but today we have no experience with that. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Thierry. Thierry, I'll start the questions. I have two questions for you. One regarding the kidney. You have two wires in right coronary and left coronary. Are you doing stenting of both right and left and then put the stent? Or you put the stent and then put the valve and then stenting both? This is the first. The second, when to break? I mean, what is the criteria of the valve or that you are going to break this valve? Is it because of the big valve or it is a small valve? Or how can you estimate this? Because I found it in many live cases, but I don't know that, and I don't understand, don't have the right answer for this.
Yeah. So breaking the valve is usually we know in advance when there is a big mismatch. So for example, we have an annulus of 24 and the valve is a 21. So we know that we'll have a residual gradient more than 12 or 15 after valve procedure. So in this case, we have to anticipate to break the valve. And of course, if it's an unbreakable valve, we should consider resurgery in these particular cases. Then for the protection of coronary arteries, usually we do not stent before. So we just protect if we think we should protect, and then deploy the valve, assess the result, and carefully assess because the left main is not really visible. The ostium of the left main is only visible in a epicranial view. So it's very important to check in this view or to use IVUS, because IVUS is a very good tool to see if the left main ostium is compromised after this procedure. And of course, if the left main is compromised, we deploy the stents. So if it's evolute, we do a chimney technique. With the Edwards, usually you don't need to do a chimney technique, just put a stent up to the ostium.
Thank you for this excellent presentation. I'm asking you about your opinion. Do you think that now, when we have a patient to put a surgical valve, do we reconsider that this patient will make another valve in coming 10 or 15 years? So we have a special valve with coronary access for that. Do we have to rethink about this? Second, in Basilica technique, as you mentioned in laceration of the cusps, it's all about late obstruction of coronary artery disease. How to anticipate the patients with possibility of obstruction to do this technique, because it's a sophisticated technique and need more experience to avoid any obstruction in the coming 1 week after the procedure.
Yeah, of course, the Basilica technique is very promising. Now, if you look at the result, the mortality at 1 year, for example, is relatively high. So we are not comfortable with this technique. I think we probably will learn more how to do it well with a low risk of complication. But in France, for example, only one center has used this technique in one case. So we have no experience. So difficult to speak about that. But looking at the data, they are not so good, in my opinion, as compared to what we are doing today. The risk of late coronary occlusion is usually associated with the fact that the evaluation of the ostium of the right or the left is not optimal. That's why I was speaking about IVUS. I think IVUS can be a very good tool to check the ostium, which is not very easy to do with LAO view, for example. we don't see the ostium. So for the right, we should do a lateral view, and for the left main, we should do epicranial view.
Okay, how to deal with mitral valve complications like significant matter regurgitation post-TAVI?
Mitral valve complication, you mean valve in valve, or you mean?
No. You do TAVI and complicated bimaterial complication, like flare mitral valve or destruction of the annulus of the mitral valve.
You mean that the valve going down to the LV?
Yeah, causing complication to the mitral.
He means that the valve going down in the LV, the valve is too low, so obstructing one of the leaflets of the mitral valve.
So it's very unusual.
I think snaring. I think snaring is the only hope for this.
Yeah, but I agree. But snaring is it's not easy to snare. So you can snare, you pull back, and at one time the valve jump in the ascending aorta. So it's very difficult. I think the best is to learn how to deploy the valve without any tension, because if the valve is going down, it means that there was a lot of tension during the deployment. So I think the best is to put the valve at the right place. It should be as high as possible, but without any tension, in order to avoid the valve moving during the procedure. The other thing is that with the Evolute Pro, I don't know if it's available in Egypt, but the Evolute Pro is more slippery than the Evolute. So I never use Evolute Pro when we do valve in valve, because it may move easier than the Evolute, classic Evolute.
We have Evolute Pro, but in a special size. But I think this complication now is very rare with the new valve. Because you can reposition the valve, you can go better side, and also the cusp overlapping make the life easy because you can put the valve high as you can, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I think that when you deploy the Evolute, you have one point of no return, but before that, you can have something very stable without any tension, and if you are happy with the position, then you remove the valve, and usually it's not moving. So it's very unusual to see the valve moving when you make the last opening of the valve. You should check that there is no tension on the system.
During valve and valve TAVI, is the still LV pacing is the recommended route?
Sorry?
Okay, thank you, Terry. In valve and valve technique, is LV pacing is still a preferred route for pacing, or you shift to RV pacing? What are the risks of dilating and breaking the annulus? And finally, is there a difference of valve and valve in a degenerated TAVI versus a degenerated surgical fibrosis and outcome?
Okay, so for the pacing, when we deploy the valve, it depends really on the stability of the system. So when the system is not very stable, we pace. In other cases, we don't do it. Of course, if we have to post-dilate, you have to pace because the valve may move during dilatation of the valve. So then we pace like we pace for the S3 deployment. So 180, 200, we want to have a pressure which is around 50 millimeter of mercury when we do post-dilatation.
My question to you, Terry, do you prefer self-expandable or balloon expandable in valve procedures?
I have no preference. I think it's really a la carte. So according to the MSCT of the patient, we select the best valve possible for the patient according to MSCT. So it's, I think today we are around 50-50. I don't know, Thomas, maybe you can comment. It's about 50-50. Now for, of course there is cases where we have to do surgery because of mismatch, because of we anticipate that the risk of occlusion is very high, etc. Of course.
I have a question. A lady, 34 years old, she's pregnant in the 6 months. She had a degenerated Carpentier-Edwards size 23 with a gradient around 100. Is TAVI a solution for her problem? What do you think about this? And what is the youngest age you use TAVI in your experience?
It's a difficult question. Usually we don't do TAVI in a young patient, so I think the younger one was a patient around 60 with cardiac shock. We had another one also, cancer, and the surgery was denied. So this is the kind of patient. Now a young woman, 32, you said, it's very 34.
Precious pregnancy, precious baby. They are refusing any risk for the baby. This is a real problem. We see this case
I understand.
degenerated, and she's in failure, severe pulmonary edema. And
Okay, so in this case, it's a kind of emergency situation. The patient refused to have surgery.
Can we do
I see.
balloon
Yeah.
only, just ballooning?
Yeah, I
Ballooning?
think there is
Palliative balloon.
For valve-in-valve, I don't like to do balloon alone because you have a risk of rupture of one cusp with acute regurgitation. You may have some risk of stroke also. So I think in this particular case, maybe TAVI is a solution, knowing that maybe 8 or 10 years later, she will need resurgery again.
third valve.
Okay, thank you very much, Terry. Now
Thank
coming
you.
to the, thank you, coming to the live.
Yeah,
The
so
live
Thomas
response.
is ready.